All right, good morning and welcome to day 6 of the online AWD1100 C# programming class at Rankin Technical College for summer 2023. This is Jeff Scott. I sent you out an email this morning, and as it says here, we're going to do about 3 or 4 things today. First, I want to make sure that people are okay with Git and GitHub, so I'm going to show you not another way of doing it, but something that may end up helping you. I don't know. I also want to discuss the homework. Everyone's first test has been graded. All right. And I will send you today an email that's got your test on it. If you got 100%, won't have anything marked up. And if you didn't, it'll say where I took off. All right. So we'll talk about that. Or, um, but more so, I want to talk about the homework and the written tests because a lot of people haven't turned those in yet. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, let's assume for a second that you came out. I'm gonna quick do this just so you can see it. And again, what I'm about to show you, do you have to do it? Of course not, but it's something you may want to do. So I'm going to go out to github.com and the I'm going to grab the repository that I had you grab at the beginning of the semester, which was JP Scott students. It's got the projects, etc. It's got all this stuff in it. I'm going to go over to code and I'm going to go to download zip. Now, this is going to take a couple minutes. You all know that because it's not a small file. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my desktop and I'm going to make 4 folders. All right, I'm going to assume that I'm a student in the class. So I'm going to make myself 4 folders. The first one will be Jeff Scott AWD 1100 HOTS. And I'm going to put my hands-on tests in there. All right. Then the second one will be Jeff Scott AWD 1100. And I'm going to call this written tests. All right. Then the third one is going to be called Jeff Scott AWD 1100 homework. And finally, the last one will be called Jeff Scott AWD 1100 labs. Okay. So I now have these 4 folders that I've created. Now I'm going to come back here and go into my downloads folder. And there's the folder that I just downloaded, this AWD 1100 master 1. I'm just going to drag it over to here and I'm going to extract it. And it says, what name do I want to give it? And I'm just going to, right for now, I'm just going to call it AWD Summer 2023. And I'm going to extract it. Again, I realize this will take a minute or two to do. Actually going faster than I thought it would, which is good. Okay, so I now have this. So why did I do that? Well, I'm going to open it, and there's a bunch of junk in here, and I'm going to go and keep opening it. Now I'm going to grab extra exercises, and I'm going to drag that into my homework folder and copy it in there. Then I'm going to grab projects, and I'm going to drag that into my labs folder. All right. Then I'm going to grab written tests and I'm going to drag that into the written test folder and copy that in there. So now what I've done in a matter of moments is in my written test folder, I now have all my written tests. In my homework folder, I have all those extra exercises. All right. In my labs folder, I've got the projects. And let's assume that I've written hands-on test 1. All right. And then I can put that in there. Now, if you do that, if you choose to do that, hey, that's great. Make sure you send me an invite to all 4 folders. That may be easier for you than having this humongous folder that you're constantly putting work into. So for each one of these, you'll have to go in and create, do a get a init. Then as you do your homework, a git add dot, you'll have to go and you'll have to set up the remote. All right. If you need help on that, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to work with you on it. All right. I'm going to do today a little bit differently. And what I mean is I'm going to start by opening up the payroll folder. And I'm going to open that up. What I want to do is I want to incorporate some of the stuff we've learned in chapter 5 and some of the stuff we're going to learn in chapter 6. I want to incorporate that stuff into what we've been doing. And if you say, I don't understand what you mean, bear with me for a second, and I think you will. All right. So far in this folder, I have 2 different console files and 2 different GUI files for a payroll. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new console file. All right. So I'm going to come in here. And again, you will get all this. I guess yesterday, I don't remember if I actually updated the repos, but I will today. All right. So I'm going to add a new project into here. It will be a console app.net C#. Next, and I will call it payroll console 03. All right. And there it is. Now it's going to sound kind of strange, but for now, I'm going to grab everything that I had in version 2 of this. Everything that's inside of main. I'm going to grab it all and I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. All right. And now I'm going to go back in. Let me close that. And just so I have it, I'm going to put it down here at the bottom of my program because I don't want to miss anything that I've done previously. All right. So I'm going to paste that in. That's just junk that's in there. Why am I doing that? Well, what I want to do is I want to come back into here and I want to rewrite this, but I want to rewrite it using some of the stuff we learned in chapter 5 and some of the stuff we will learn in chapter 6. And if you say, I don't understand, then just hang with me if you would. All right. Now, first thing I'm going to do is like I did in class yesterday, I'm going to declare and initialize some program constants. All right. So there'll be 4 of them. So I'm going to have a const decimal and I'll call it max hours. And I'm going to set that equal to 84 M. That's the most hours someone can work in a week. I should also make a const decimal min hours, and that'll be equal to 0 M. That's the least number of hours a person can work in a week. Whoops. All right, 2 more. A const decimal max, let's do min first, min rate, and we'll make that equal to 0 M. And finally, a const decimal max rate, and that'll be equal to 99.99 M. Now, we talked about this yesterday, but I want to say it again. And that is, we are assuming that a person must work between 0 and 84 hours in a week. we are assuming that a person makes between 0 and $99.99 an hour. Those are just things I've made up. They really have no special significance other than that. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create I'm going to create a Boolean variable that I'm going to call keep going. Okay. And I'm going to set it equal to true. You say, why? What is that? I'm going to show you in just a minute. All right. So while keep going, what do I want to do here? Well, I want to basically input 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of information. Okay. So in other words, I'm going to call 4 routines. Okay. Now this is different because previously we've been putting all of our code inside of main. I'm pulling it out of main. So I'm going to say here, decimal hours equal input hours. Again, I'm going to get errors for all these. Don't worry about it. Decimal rate equal input rate. All right, what else? Oh, I had a first name and a last name, so let's do those too. String, we'll call it F name, and we'll set that equal to input first name. And we'll have another string in here that's called L name, and we'll set that equal to input last name. All right. Now, because we're just starting with this, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take all 3 of these and comment them out. All right. Let's just concentrate right now on this F name. Okay. Now, I have to write a routine that's called input first name. I'm not passing anything into it, and it must return a string. That string that it returns gets plopped into this variable. If that confuses you, let's look at it. Since main is static, and since I'm working with things that are going to be involved with main, all right, this has to be static as well. So I'm going to type in here static string input first name. Notice as soon as I do that, the error here goes away and I get a new error. Why? Because I'm not returning anything yet. Okay. Now, if I come down here just so I get this message gone and I type in return an empty string, now the message goes away. It wouldn't do anything other than set the first name equal to the empty string, but I just wanted you to see that. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I want to keep the user inside of here. I want to keep the user inside of here until she or he enters something for the first name. All right. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to make another. This keep going is for main, but I'm going to make another keep going in here. And this keep going is going to be for input first name. I'm doing this really simplistically. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say string. Heck, let's not even do that. Let's come up to the top here. We don't need these, remember? But I will say using static system.console. All right. And I might need to go and add a using system also. We'll know in a bit. So I'm going to come in here and say write. Please enter your first name. Now, a couple of you on the test, you made this a right line. So you inputted the data for the read line on a new blank line. That just looks bad. You really should use a right here. So I'm going to say string first equal read line. Now, could I have called it first name like we did our F name up here? Sure. I can call it whatever I want. All right. So if I run this right now, I'm going to return first. But before I do that, let's see. String first. Oh, I'm going to have to declare that out here. So string first. We'll set it equal to the empty string. All right. So now I can just say first equal this. There we go. All right. Now, before I even return first or anything else, I'm just going to come in here and type in a read line so the program stops. All right. So if I were to run this right now, and I do a file, save all, and I run this, oh, it's going to run the last one. So let me set this as my start project. So you can see it says, please enter your first name. And if I type in Jeff, all right, I'm right now in a loop. That's an infinite loop because I haven't given myself a way out. All right, so let's do that. I'm going to say this, if first dot trim, all right, if that is equal to nothing, how about doing it this way? Yeah, if it's equal to nothing, see, we want to do this while keep going is true. If it's not equal to nothing, we're going to say first name or keep going equal false. Now, what did that do? This is where you have to start playing computer. All right. So this is going to be the first name. All right. We set this keep going to true. So we're going to go in there. It's going to say, please enter your first name with a space. So let's say I put Jeff in there. All right. So in the, that read line, I put in Jeff. So it's going to say if first dot trim, which is going to trim any leading or trailing spaces. If it's not equal to blank, it won't be because I'm going to put Jeff in there. So keep going will be false. It'll come back up here. It'll say, oh, and it'll fall out of the loop. On the other hand, if I don't put anything in here, all right, if I leave it totally blank, then after I trim it, it will be equal. All right, so it's going to skip this. It's going to still be equal to true, and it's going to ask me to do it again and again and again and again. Just to show you that, all right, if I leave this blank and hit enter, it asks me to do it again, and it will keep asking me. But now if I put in my name and I hit enter, all right, don't worry that it still says that. That's okay. But the point is, what happened is it now took that value and it returned first. The problem is then it jumped right back up into here. Okay. And it kept going, and it kept going, and it kept going, and it kept going. All right. So we've got this routine that says, please enter your first name. All right. Let's write another one that will be virtually identical to it, except it's going to work with the last name. Okay. So let's see. All right. So this will be input last name. It's giving me an error because I already have a routine by that name. This will say last. Now it'll say enter your last, and this will be last, and this will be last, and this will be last. But what I want you to understand now, what should happen here is it should now allow me to put in both a first name and a last name. Let's see if that's indeed the case. All right, so put in a first name, Jeff. Put in a last name, Scott. All right. Now it's asking, it's going to go through it again, but that's okay. All right. The other thing now is I don't need this read line that we had after first name, but we still need the one after last name. So now we want to input hours. All right. Again, we'll get an error because we haven't written a routine yet called input hours. How is this one different? Well, the name is different, but it's going to return a number rather than a string like we returned for the first two. So we've got this thing called input hours. This is going to say static decimal input hours. Okay. And right now, again, it's giving us an error because we're not returning anything. If I come down here and I say return 0.0m, I have no errors and everything is cool. I'm going to move my read line down to here, but I haven't written the routine yet, but now I can get rid of this read line. All right. Now we're going to do a similar thing to what we did in here. So I'm going to put another string in here, or I'm sorry, another Boolean in here that's called keep going. I'm going to set it equal to true. And I'm going to have another decimal in here now that we'll call hours. And we'll set that equal to 0.0m. Again, whether you set it equal to 0m, 0.0m, it doesn't matter. All right. So while keep going, looks familiar. Now we're going to say, we're going to put a right in here that says, please enter hours worked. And to try to make it easier for the user, we're going to tell them that it must go between 0 and 84. All right. And then hours equal. Now, it's going to be a read line. Remember, we could do this. Convert dot to decimal read line. We could do that, but the program will blow up if we leave it blank or if we put something in there that is not numeric. All right. So let's go in like we did earlier, and let's put a Boolean variable in here that's called result. All right. And instead of doing it like this, I'm going to do it like this. Result equal decimal dot try parse read line. Well, it's all right here. So this tells us to try doing that. All right. And now we can say if not result, well, we know we have an error, correct? We know we have an error. So we have to ask the user to do it again. But if result is true, we've got something in hours. So we can now return hours. Here we're returning last, here we're returning first. All right. So we can do it like this. We can say if result, meaning that it worked. Now we can say keep going equal, keep going equal false. Now what should happen, and this is not complete yet, but now what should happen, all right? So if this was true, keep going should be false, and we should fall down to here. So let's see if indeed now we are asked these three things. All right, enter a first name, Jeff, enter a last name, Scott, enter an hours worked. Let's just say I'll put in 40, doesn't matter. All right, now it's going to ask me for them again. First name, notice it's not taking blanks. All right, so far it's working. All right, that's good. So let's see, please enter your first name, please enter your last name. Let's put another blank space in here. There we go. Please enter your hours worked. Okay. Now, we know that we want to keep going if this didn't work. Okay. So we can say, if not result, okay, then keep going equal true. But we also have to check, because if we put in a negative value for hours, or we put in a value for hours that is greater than 84, we shouldn't accept that either. So what we can say here is, if not result, like that. Let me put them in, I probably have too many parens, but or hours less than 0, or hours greater than 84, like that. I think we need one more ending parenthesis on there. Now, we don't want to use 0 because we've already got min hours. All right, so let's put min hours in here for this. And let's put max hours in here for this. So in English, what we're saying here is, if either we put something non-numeric in there, or if we put in a number for hours that was negative, or we put in a number for hours that was greater than 84, we want keep going to be equal to true. So it'll jump back up there and ask them again. Let's check that out. So right now we're reading in 3 values. We're reading in a first name, and if we leave it blank, we'll be asked again. If we put a value in there, we'll be asked to put in a last name. If we leave it blank, we'll be asked to do it again. Then we're asked for hours worked. If we leave it blank, we're asked to do it again. If we enter a value that's negative, we're asked to do it again. If we enter a value that's greater than 84, we're asked to do it again. If we enter a value that is between 0 and 84, all right, well, it's telling us again to do that. Huh. All right, then let's look and see what that problem is. Oh, there we go. Else keep going equal false. We want to get the heck out of there. So let's try that one more time. All right, I'm going to put in a first name, I'm going to put in a last name, and I'll put it in hours that's valid. And boom, now we're just running through it again. That's good. Okay. So let's do a one that's similar to what we just did. All right. So I'm going to grab this input hours that's right here, and I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. I'm going to hit enter and paste it in. But now this is going to be input rate. And I believe that's what we called it up here. Yes, it is. All right. So how is this one going to change? Well, we want rate to be equal to this. Oops. All right. So please enter hourly rate. And that is between 0 and 99.99. All right. So we're going to try to do this. And if it works, we're going to put it into rate. And if rate is less than min rate, or rate is greater than max rate, we're again going to just tell them to do it again. And then we will return rate. All right. Now I'm going to grab this read line and I'm going to put it back up here. We've now got most of our stuff in here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a write line. And I'm going to say two things. I'm going to say we have now called the following functions. Another right line. Input first name, which returned, and then we'll put in our first name, and that's F name. Let me put this read line back in here. Okay. We called input last name, which returned L name. We called input hours, which returned our hours. And we called input rate, which returned our rate. All right. So now what I can do is I can come back here and I can test to make sure that everything I tried to do worked. So let me save this. Let me run the program. We put in whole new names. We'll put in Stacy Jones. And Stacy worked 40 hours and Stacy makes $25 an hour. So it's telling us we have now called these functions. First name, return Stacy. Last name, return Jones. Input hours, return 40. Input rate, return 25. All right, that's good. We've now got everything that we need. Okay, and it's just going to ask us to go through it again, but that's okay. First, let's come in here and do this. And I think I still have a read line down in here in one of these. There it is. Don't need that. There we go. All right. So now that I've done all this, now I can say decimal gross equal calculate gross pay. All right. I'm getting an error because that hasn't been written yet. But to calculate the gross pay, it needs two pieces of information, the hours and the rate. So I've got to pass to those routines, hours and rate. Now let me grab this. And I guess to be more like they show in our book, that should be a capital I. So should that. So should that. I'm used to starting my methods, which is what these are, with a lowercase. In the book, they use uppercase. So I've got to change them here as well. As long as you're consistent, I don't care which way you do it. So that should have fixed everything. I should only have one error, and that's in this calculate gross pay. Okay. So I'm going to write one more routine down at the bottom here. Okay, it'll be another routine. It'll look just like what we had before. Static. This will have to return a decimal. It's called calculate gross pay. It needs two pieces of information, a decimal value called hours and a decimal value called rate. Now, for now, all I'm going to say is return hours times rate. I'm going to change this in a minute, but I'm just showing this to you now. Okay, so I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add one more thing. All right. And we're going to say, so we'll have to change all these and make them capital, I guess. Input first name, input last name, input hours, input rate, and this will be calculate gross pay. And that return our gross. Now, to pretty it up just a little bit, all right, we don't have to do this, But to pretty it up just a little bit, let's do gross dot toString, and let's make it currency. And let's do the same thing for rate. So dot toString, and we'll make it currency. All right. And this is going to need another paren here and here. And for hours, we'll do a dot toString, and we'll just make it a number field with 2 decimal places. You don't have to do that, but we'll do that anyway. All right. So now let's see if our math worked. All right. Okay. So file, save all. Let's run it. We'll use somebody else. So we'll use George Kramer. George worked 30 hours this week, and George makes $30 an hour. All right. So George Kramer, 30, 900. Looks to me like everything's working. All right. Now, here is the problem. And what I want to do is I want to be able to incorporate what we did in class yesterday. We're doing some of it in here with these loops. Now, notice I created brand new keep going here and here and here and here and here. And that's totally fine. And I've got a result in each one of these. I could have made them global, but to me, there's really no sense in doing that. We could have done that, but I don't see really a value in doing that. So I could have defined them up here. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to go down into here. And what if the person worked more than 40 hours? Then they should get some overtime. So let's go in here and add a couple more constants. So I'm going to come in here and add another constant. It'll be a decimal, and I'm going to call it max non-OT. And I'm going to set that equal to 40M. So that's the most number of hours you can work without getting any overtime. And I'm going to make another constant decimal that I'm going to call, I can just call it OT rate. That'll be our overtime rate. And that'll be equal to 1.5M. So in other words, if you work more than 40 hours, what's going to happen is you're going to get time and a half. Now, these are gray because they're not being used yet. All right. So I'm going to come back down here and I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to create a decimal variable that's called gross. And I'm going to set it equal to 0M. Okay. And I'm going to say if the number of hours that you worked was less than or equal to max non-OT, what does that mean? 40 or less hours worked, no overtime. So if that's the case, I want to do this. I want to return this. All right. I'm not going to write it like that, though. I'm going to say gross equal that. All right. Otherwise, so else, what do we know? All right. What do we know? Well, we know greater than 40 hours worked, pay overtime. All right. So we know that for the first 40 hours that they worked, the first 40, they get paid regular pay. Okay. And we know for anything over that, they get time and a half. Okay. So let's come in here and let's do this. I'm going to create another thing up here. All right. And I'm going to call it reg hours, like that. And I'm just going to set that equal to I'm going to set that equal to 40M. All right. So if this is the case, and then I'm going to make another variable that I'm going to call temp, decimal temp, and I'm going to set that equal to 0M. And if I'm totally confusing you, I'm sorry, but give me a second here. I'm going to say temp equal reg hours times rate. Now that paid for their first 40 hours. So first 40 hours, no OT paid. All right, so that's temp. So that's what we've got so far. All right, well, let's see. Let's create yet another variable. So we had reg hours. Let's create another variable called OT hours, and we'll set that equal to 0M. All right, so our OT hours, they're equal to the number of hours we worked minus our regular hours. Is over 1. All right, so this will be number of overtime hours worked. Just like that. All right, so now we know what we have to do then is we have to say, we have to add that. All right, we have to add that basically to this. We've got to add that to temp. So we've got gross, we've got regular hours, we've got overtime hours, we've got temp, which is holding our regular pay. And temp isn't a great name, so let's call this reg pay, regular pay. And let's make another one and call it OT pay. And again, set it equal to 0M. So OT pay is equal to what? All right, it's equal to OT hours times our rate times our overtime rate. That's OTHRS. That's why I'm getting the error. All right. And I'm getting an error here because we changed this from temp to what? Reg pay. Like that. All right. We're going to fix everything up in just a second. So this, we'll call this regular pay. In other words, it's the first 40 hours they worked, they get no overtime. This is the overtime pay. All right, which is their OT hours times their rate times 1.5, which is the overtime rate. So now I've got a regular pay and I've got an overtime pay. Okay, so now I can come in here and I can say gross is equal to the regular pay plus the overtime pay. And I can just return gross right here. Now, again, please play computer here. All right. And what I mean by when I say play computer here is simply, all right, let's say the person works 50 hours and they make $10 an hour. All right. So are hours less than or equal to 40? No. So we'll come down here. So their regular pay will be their regular hours, 40 times $10 an hour, $400. Their overtime hours will be their hours, 50 minus the regular hours, which is 40. So that's 10. Their overtime pay will be those overtime hours, which is 10 times their rate, which is 10 times the overtime rate, which is 1.5. So that should give them 150. And if I add the 400 and the 150, I should get 550. All right, good morning. What I'm doing is I am rewriting the payroll program, but I'm rewriting it using both methods, and we'll go over this again in just a second, and the if statements and stuff that we used yesterday. All right, so I've taken this and I've totally rewritten it. All right, so let's see if it's working. Now this is the console version. So if I work some overtime, 50, and I make $10 an hour, what this should say then is that I made $550, and I did. So all that is working. We have now called the following functions, and that's everything. The only thing is this is kind of ugly in the way that it looks right now. All right. So let's pretty that up a little bit. And what I mean is, rather than having all these right line statements right here, all right, I'm going to call a routine that's just going to say display all inputs and outputs. And I'll need to pass into that the first name, the last name, the hours, the rate, and the gross. I'm getting an error because I haven't written a routine yet that's called display all inputs and outputs. I'm putting that down on the bottom here. It's over 2 lines because you won't see it otherwise. Okay. And let me paste that in. I'm going to get some errors. Don't worry, we'll fix them right away. Right. Believe it or not, we're finished, but let's take a look at it. And I shouldn't say we're finished. We're just about there. So enter first name, Jeff. Enter a last name, Scott. Enter an hours worked, 40. Enter an hourly rate, 25. All right, so Jeff Scott, 40 hours, $25 an hour. I made $1,000. That looks good. All right. And it's going to just keep going through this because that's what I've asked to have happen. Now, make a couple fairly superficial changes, and then we'll be finished. All right, the first thing I want to do is when I'm printing this stuff out, I'm going to type in clear so it'll print on a brand new page. All right. Now, The only other thing is we want to ask the user if they want to run the program again. All right. And this up here, we had this keep going while keep going. All right. And we're calling display all inputs and outputs, but I'm going to say this, keep going equal display all inputs and outputs. It's giving us an error. We'll fix the error right now. This will have to say bool, and that should fix everything. Static bool, well, why isn't it? Let's see. Oh, because we're not returning anything right now. All right. So we will ask the user if they want to run the program again. Yeah. All right. Let me save it, run it, make sure it works, and then we're going to go over it line by line. So we come in, we ask the user their first name and their last name and the number of hours they worked and the amount they made per hour. And then we get all that information. Then we ask if they want to run the program again. And if we say yes, it's going to run it again. So again, please enter a first name. Notice if I put some checks in here. So if I leave the first name blank, it just keeps asking you. So once you put in a value, then it asks for the last name. If I keep leaving that blank, it'll keep asking me as well. All right. Then for hours worked, it has to be between 0 and 84. So if I leave it blank, it doesn't take it. If I put in this, it doesn't take it. If I put in a value that's less than 0, it doesn't take it. If I put in a value that's greater than 84, it doesn't take it. So I'm doing validation of my input here. So if I put in 50 here, now it took it. So it asks for an hourly rate. Again, if I leave it blank, it won't take it. If I put in non-numeric, it won't take it. A negative number, it won't take it. A number that's bigger, it won't take it. But if we put in 10, okay, not only did it figure that out, but it also did overtime. We worked 10 hours of overtime here. So those 10 hours were paid at time and a half. So it was 10 times 10 times 1.5. Now, if I don't want to run the program again, I'm done. So let's go over everything that's in here. There's a lot in here. All right. It's 166 lines. So let's take it top to bottom. All right. So I don't need this stuff. I could, but I don't really need it. So, all right. So I've created in here 6 constants. So this minimum hours to work. This, as you'd probably guess then, is maximum hours to work. This will be the minimum hourly rate. This will be the maximum hourly rate. All right. This will be max hours to work without overtime. And this will be the overtime rate. All right. So hopefully by putting those comments in there, what each one of those constants is doing makes sense. And if they don't, you'll ask. All right. You'll notice all these are decimal too, because I'm working with dollars and cents. So that made the most sense. No pun intended there. Now, we've totally changed around main. Main is now what is referred to as a driver. All right. And what that means is, since it's a driver, what that means is that rather than main putting all the code in there, what main is doing is main is calling all the other routines. When you create main and make it a driver like this, in a way, it's kind of like a supervisor. Now, I don't mean it all to demean a supervisor, but I would say that in my work history, there have been times when I've reported to certain supervisors and I've wondered what exactly did they do? I had one a few years ago and I wondered that. He was a great guy. I'm still friends with him today, even though we only see each other once or twice a year. His name's Larry. But I always wondered, what does Larry do? And then during the middle of a semester one year, Larry went on a 2-week vacation. And a lot of the things started to go to hell where I worked. And then I realized what he did. It's not that he did the work he did, but he knew who to delegate responsibility to in order to get things done. And to be honest with you, that's what we're doing here. So rather than doing everything in main, this routine is just going to input our first name. This routine is just going to input our last name. This routine is just going to input our hours worked. This routine is just going to input how much we made per hour. This routine is just going to calculate the gross pay. And this routine is just going to print everything out. That's all of its jobs. All right. That's what it's doing. And when we come in here, then there's still some duplication. We can make this better, but we're not worried about that right now. All right. This input first name and input last name are basically the same routine. Later, we'll learn how we can rewrite that and make it one routine. Don't worry about that right now. That's coming in like chapters 8 or something like that. I don't know. 9, 7, I don't know. But this routine is doing just one thing. Ideally, when you write routines, and these routines are known as methods or functions, but ideally, these methods should do one and only one thing. The only job of this routine is to allow us to input a first name. And you'll notice we put it into a loop that says basically, all right, if we put something in there, if we put something into the first name, we'll set keep going equal to false, which will get us out of the loop. But if we leave the first name blank, then we skip this. Since we're skipping this, keep going is true. So we'll come back up and it says, while keep going. Remember, that's another way of saying while keep going equal true. All right. So we'll keep going through it. So we are stuck in a loop right here until we enter something. And it can't be a blank, just blank hitting the space bar, because the trim takes care of all leading and trailing blank spaces. So we have to put in a name, a first name. then we return that first name. This right here, first, is of type string, and that must be the same as this, because that's what we are returning. Then this first that we've got right here, when it goes back to the program, that gets stuffed into fname. Then we call another routine that's going to input the last name. Again, it's almost the same as the first one, but instead of inputting a first name, it's now inputting a last name. Again, we're stuck in here until we put in something. Then we return last, and that last gets stuffed into lname. All right. Could we have called this first and last like the other ones? Yes. Could we have, inside of those routines where we called them first and last, could we have called them fname and lname in there? Sure. All right. So that's handling the first and last name. Now we are doing the hours. And you'll notice the hours is a number. So the hours and the rate and the gross are all type decimal. All right. So when we get down to hours, there it is. This is allowing us to use some of the stuff, much of the stuff we used, we learned yesterday. Again, we're using a loop. That's a while loop. We've got an if else in there. All right. We've got a couple of or statements in there, those two pipe signs. So what are we doing? We're asking the user to enter hours worked. It's kind of nice when you let them know what you're expecting. So I put 0 to 84. And then whatever they enter after they hit enter, all right, that's going to go into the read line. Then we attempt to parse that, convert it into a number. If we can convert it into a number, we'll put it into hours and result will be true. If we cannot put it into hours, so we left it blank or put in something non-numeric, then result is false. So if result is false, or we entered a value for hours that was less than 0, or we entered a value for hours that is greater than 84, we said keep going, even though it already is true. We set it equal to true, so it's just going to ask them again. If this isn't true, so let's say we entered 40. All right. So that worked. Hours now holds 40. So it returned true. So that isn't true. It's not, 40 is not less than 0. 40 is not greater than 80. So we set keep going equal to false. Boom. That pops us out of this loop and we just return hours. Then we do an almost exact thing, but instead of hours, we do it for rate. All right. I tried to write these routines and make them all as similar as possible so you could see how much commonality there is between what we're doing here. All right. So again, here we're telling them to enter a rate between 0 and 99.99. Here we're attempting to take whatever they enter and convert it into a decimal. And if we can, we put it into rate and result is true. If we cannot, result is false. If result is false, or we put in a number less than 0, or we put in a number greater than 99.99, keep going is set to true, so we're going to ask them to do it again. If we put in 10, for example, all right, then 10 will be true, so we don't have to worry about that. 10 is not less than 0. 10 is not greater than 99.99. So keep going will be equal to false and will fall out. With each one of these routines we've looked at so far, these routines right here, these first 4, they all return a value. So input first name is going to return a value that we stuff into fname. Input last name is going to return a value we stuff into lname. Hours is going to return a value, or input hours is going to return a value we stuff into hours. Input rate is going to return a value we stuff into rate. All right. Then now we've got the stuff we need to calculate our gross pay. But calculate gross pay needs to know what the current hours are we worked and what our current hourly rate is. So these are called arguments or parameters. We are passing hours and rate into the calculate gross pay routine. So if we go down to that routine, there it is. And there we gave them the same name. We could have given them the same name or called them anything we wanted, right? But I kept the same name, those being hours and rate. And then I made a bunch of, these are local variables. I made them in here. All right, gross is what we're going to end up returning. And if they didn't work overtime, gross is simply the hours they work times their rate. So if they work 10 hours and they make $10 an hour, it's going to gross will be 100. However, if they worked 50 hours, then their regular pay is going to be 40 hours times 10, so that's 400. But if they work 50 hours, then it's going to be 50 minus 40, which is the regular hours. So their overtime hours is 10. Right there, it's 10. All right. And our overtime pay then, right, our overtime pay is going to be the number of hours that they worked, the overtime hours they worked, 10, times the overtime rate, or the regular rate of 10, times the overtime rate, which is 1.5. All right. So they're either going to do their gross like this, or they're going to do their gross like this. Then we return the gross. That gets stuffed into this. And finally, we call this. Keep going. And you'll notice we just say keep going equal. All right. And we're going to stuff something that's going to be returned from this into keep going. Since keep going is a Boolean, this routine must return true or false, because that's all that a Boolean can accept. All right. So we come down to there. And here's where we just display everything. Notice now the first name, I don't have to call it up here. These are called actual parameters. I have to use F name, and I have to use L name, and I have to use hours, and I have to use rate, and I have to use gross. Those are their actual names. But when I use them in a routine, I can give them that name, or I can call them anything I want. So to keep it simple, instead of first name, I called it FN. Instead of last name, I called it LN. Instead of hours, I called it H. Instead of rate, I called it R. And instead of gross, I called it G. I could have still called them F name, L name, hours, rate, and gross. Then I'd have to change them in here as well. All right. So that's all we're doing, is we're printing out the person's information. Then we're going to ask them, do you want to run the program again? All right. And whatever they enter in here, we're going to stick into a variable called again. Okay. And then we've got this Boolean, yes or no. And all we do with again here is whatever they typed in, all right, whatever they typed in, we're just, if it was a lowercase y or an uppercase y, and if it was, we're going to say true. And what does that mean? That means we want to run it again. All right, but we set it up to false initially. So if it doesn't have this, it skips it and it'll return yes or no, which will be false. If it has this, then yes or no will be true and it'll return that. And that is the entire program. Now, is that easy? No, I'm not saying that it is, but I'm trying to introduce this in a way that it will hopefully make some sense to you. All right. So we now have in here, we now have a console app that has input validation in it. All right. Now, one of the things that I had said yesterday, let me close this. One of the things that I had said yesterday is our payroll GUI that we did yesterday. That's this one right here. Okay. Right now, if you remember, if we, oops, it's not going to run it. Let's run it. If we can leave this blank, we can leave that blank. And if we do this, it says first name cannot be empty. Okay, so we've already got some of that stuff in there. Good. All right, last name, good. All right. And notice the hours worked. We've already got that check in there. All right. But the thing is now if we put in 50 here and 10, it works, but we don't have any overtime. Person did not make any overtime. All right. So it is 9:11. I'm going to go and take a break until 9:21. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to rewrite this program, not rewrite it even. I'm going to add to this program the same constants we had before. Plus, we're going to set it up so that if the person has overtime, that they're going to get paid overtime. All right. So we'll come into here. And notice I do have some of these are in here already. Minimum and maximum, that's good. That's all good. But what I didn't add before, and I'm going to add it right now, I'm going to say const decimal. And just like I did before, I'm going to call this max non-OT. And I'm going to set that equal to 40M. And I'm going to have another constant decimal that's going to be called OT rate. Okay. And that's going to be equal to 1.5 M. And all that is that symbolizing that the most hours you can work without overtime are 40, and that the overtime rate is time and a half. That's all that this is showing. All right. They're gray right now because we're not using them at all in the program. So everything in here is good. Everything in here is good. All this stuff is good that's in here. But the gross pay right now, all right, the gross pay, what that does is it does it the same for everybody. Plus, when you look in here right now, we're doing everything inside of our event. We're doing everything inside of our button click event. So I'm going to pull all of this code out right there. And I'm going to put well, I guess it's even further. It was all the way down here. Put each one of these into their own routine. All right. And we'll do that in just a couple minutes. It is now 9:13. Let's come back at 9:25 and then we'll do that. After we get done with that, I'm going to go through chapter 6. Uh, All right, it is 9:25, so I'm going to start back up again. I copied everything over into a new program, all the code and everything. So if I run this now, it works, but it still doesn't have the overtime pay and the like is in there because I'll put that in a minute. But if I do run this, should work. Well, I thought it did, but we'll check on that in just a minute. All right. So, okay, the buttons don't work, and that's okay. We'll get them fixed in just a minute. I want to show you the two reasons why we actually want to do what we're doing, and that is to break this up into a bunch of smaller routines. So first, I'm going to click on exit, and I know what the problem is, so let me fix it. Just a minute. Give me a second here. All right. When I copied everything over, yeah, yeah, I knew it was going to do this too. Okay. All right. When I copied everything over, unfortunately, it did copy everything over, but it wasn't smart enough to say that's the name of this and that's the name of this, etc. So when I click on the buttons, what it does now is it makes a new one that's called exit click one. So I've got to take my code that was in my exit button. And this is one of the things I don't like about Visual Studio is they make it harder than it has to be to copy stuff from here to there. All right. So I'm going to do this. Put it in here. Now I can get rid of this routine. Whoops. I can get rid of this routine. And I'm going to do the same thing with the clear button. So there that is. And I'm going to copy this code in. And now I can remove the clear button that was here. All right. And let's make sure that both of those work. So that works. And that works. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is rather than actually putting the code in to the button here for the click event, I'm going to put the code into its own event. So I'm going to remove this. And I'm going to call this exit program or not to give the user the chance to exit the program if she or he wishes to. And now I'm going to type in here private void exit program or not and paste that in. It'll still work the same. So when I run it, it still asks. And if I say no, it doesn't. And if I say yes, it does. So why did I even do that? I mean, what did that buy me? Let me show you what it bought us. All right. We haven't looked at this yet. It's something that's later on in the book, but I'm just going to show it to you right now. All right. And that is, I'm going to come down to my toolbox here and I'm going to find something that says menu strip. All right. There it is. I'm going to drag it and just put it right up on top there, right there. All right. And now I'm going to type in here three things: calculate. And then next to this, I'm going to type in clear. And then next to that, I'm going to type in exit. All right. Now I've got three menu options in my program. They've got really bad names. This first one is called calculate tool strip menu item. All right. And I'm going to just change the name of that because I don't like that name. So I'm going to change the name to just calculate menu item. I'm going to get rid of the word tool strip from there. So this is now called calculate menu item. This is now going to be called clear menu item. And then finally, this will be called exit menu item. And that's all fine and dandy. What did that buy me? Well, guess what? If I double click on this, it brings up the click event. All right. So now I want this code, but I don't want to type in that code. I want to be able to call that code from either the button or from the menu. And now I can do that. So if you look, if I save this and run the program, I now have a menu item up here that says exit. So if I click here, I can do my exit, but also if I click here, I can do my exit. From different places. One of the reasons that you typically go in like this, all right, that's one of the reasons that you typically would go in like that, and you would break this down into multiple routines. And again, the reason for that, like I just said, the reason for doing that is now I can call this from either my button or from my menu item. All right. And in the same way, if I come down here and I double click on the clear button, there's my clear routine. Well, let's take this code and I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm just going to call this clear all. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. And I'm also going to call it from here. So clear all. It's giving me errors because I haven't written it yet. So I'll type in private void clear all. Oops. Clear all. And now I'll paste that in. So now I can come in and I've got my choice. Once I put stuff into these, I can click clear here, or I can click clear right here. They both work and they're both calling the same routine. That's one of the reasons that you take and bust a program up into a bunch of mini programs, you can kind of say. The other one is, the idea is all the clear button should be doing, again, is clearing this out. All the exit button should be doing is exiting. But right now, the calculate is handling first name, last name, hours worked, hourly rate, gross pay, total gross pays, total gross pay amount, and average gross pay amount. So really, I should break that up into multiple programs or mini programs or methods or functions or whatever you want to call that. So that's what I'm going to do right now. All right. So I'm just grabbing all the existing code that we had. So this is in the calculate routine. All right. So what do we have in here? Hours worked, hourly rate, and gross pay. Okay. So ideally, what I'd like to be able to do is to write this and pull the equivalent of all of this code here, every bit of it from here all the way down to here. All right. That's quite a bit of code. And I want to be able to call a bunch of routines. Okay. So what do I have? What do I have to call? I have to validate. I'm going to call a routine validate first name, validate last name, validate hours worked, validate hourly rate, calculate gross pay, update counters. All right. So I want to write about 5 or so routines, and I want to be able to call those both from, and I want to be able to call those from here. I want to be able to do both. All right. So how do we go about doing that? All right. Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all that code. I've got all the code in here, but if I put it in now, I'm going to get a bunch of errors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it all down here in a comment, and just paste all that in, and then grab it as I need it. All right. So the first thing that we'll want to do, all right, is we have to validate that the first name is not empty. Okay, there it is right there. Okay, so let's see. Let's come in, and first of all, let's come down here and we're going to say private. I'm going to make this a bool, and you'll know why in just a minute, but I'm going to call this validate first name. All right, and then I'm going to paste that in. Now, right now it says return, and I'm getting an error because I'm supposed to be returning true or false, and I'm not. All right. So what I'm going to do, and this won't make a lot of sense right now, but I'm going to create a variable. It's going to be a Boolean variable. I'm going to call it retval, which means return value. And I'm going to set it equal to true. All right. And if this is empty, all right, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say retval equal false. And finally, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to return retval. Well, let's break this down. Okay, so the first thing I want to do in either one of these is I want to return, or I want to validate the first name. Well, that's going to have to be put into a Boolean variable. All right, so I'm going to call this Boolean variable keep going. Bool keep going. And I'm going to set it equal to validate first name, like that. And I'm going to have that same line in here as well, right there. Okay. We'll move it around in a little bit, but I just want you to see what's going on. So if the first name was valid, it's going to return true, meaning there was something in there. And if it was not valid, it's going to return false. All right. So I'm going to say in here, if keep going. In other words, if this returned true, now I want to say keep going equal, and I'm going to call validate last name. All right. And I'm getting an error because I haven't written it yet, but we're going to write it in just a minute. All right. Let's put that right down below the other one. We've already got the code. It's right here. All right. So right below the validate first name, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in private bool validate last name. All right. And I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to make two changes like I did before. And that is, I'm going to say bool retval equal true, just like that. And here I'm going to say retval equal false. And finally down here, I'm going to say return retval. All right. So what this is doing is it's saying, hey, if the last name was empty, show me a message box that says that. All right. Put the focus back there and return false. All right. Because the last name wasn't. Okay. Otherwise, there was something in there. So you'll totally skip what you can see here in blue, and it'll go right from here to here, and it'll return true. Now, hopefully you notice something, and that is that with what I've written so far, this code right here and this code right here are identical. So eventually I don't want to write this same code twice. So I want to combine that into one thing of code. All right. So what if this didn't work? In other words, this if keep going. What if that didn't work? That means we had an invalid first name. So we're just going to say else return. That's it. All right. So now we've called validate first name and we've called validate last name. So we want to, no pun intended, we want to keep going. So if keep going, then we're going to say keep going equal validate hours worked. Come on, Jeff. Like that. We're getting an error because, again, it hasn't been written. So we'll come down here, private, bool, validate. I'll try that again. Validate hours worked. All right, we're getting the error because it's not returning anything yet, but we've got the code already. All right, that's in here. Now, I'm still getting error, and that's okay. First of all, I need to say bool result, because that's the result that we're using down here. So just bool result. That's going to fix most of my errors. All right. We also need hours worked. Well, we don't have an hours worked in here. What we did previously, what we did previously is we declared it in there, and I'm not declaring it in there right now. So I've got my choice. All right. I can take hours worked and hourly rate and gross pay, and I can make all of them either global variables by declaring them out here, or else I'll have to pass them in. All right. I'm going to make them global. That's not maybe the best way, but for right now, it'll be the easiest way to explain things to you. So decimal, hours worked, and that's going to be set equal to 0M. And I might as well do my other ones. Decimal hourly rate equals 0M, and decimal gross pay equal to 0M. All right, try to pretty these up a little bit here so it's easier to read. Oops. That had to be an M, and I left that off. You'll notice that hours worked is not grayed out, but the rest of them are. It's because we're already using hours worked down here. And now the other thing we have to do is, like we did, bool retval equal true. And then down here, not return true, but this is if we had an error. So retval equal false. This is also an error, so this will be a retval equal false. And then finally at the bottom here, I want to return retval like that. All right. Now I'm almost done because I've almost moved everything around. So we did come in here. Don't need this anymore. Let me get rid of that. All right. So I've got my exit covered. I've got my clear covered. And now I'm doing my calculate. So I have now validated the first name. I have now validated the last name. I have now validated the hours worked. Again, if this didn't work, we just want to return. So finally, the last thing I want to do in here is to say, if it's not the last thing, if keep going, then what? Keep going equal. Now I got to validate the hourly rate. Again, I get an error because that has not been written yet. So here's validate first name. There's validate last name. There's validate hours worked. And below that, I'm going to put in hourly rate. So private bool validate our hourly rate. And again, I already have the code for that. It's down here. Where are we? Right there. I need a bool result and a bool ret val equal true. Then I'll paste that in, and I'll have to change this to ret val equal false. I'll have to change this to ret val equal false. And finally, I'll have to say return ret val. Now, I just did a boatload of stuff, and I might have totally confused you. Believe me, that's not my intention here. All right. But there's a couple more things I want to do. Now I can come in and calculate the gross pay. All right. In other words, what have I done here? Again, play computer. All right. We've come through here and we validated the first name. If it was valid, we validated the last name. If that was valid, we validated the hours worked. If that was valid, we validated the hourly rate. All right. So else, again, we just want to return. All right. And then finally, if keep going, well, then what do we know? We know that we had a valid first name, a valid last name, a valid hours worked, and a valid hourly rate. So now we can calculate the gross pay, and we can also update our accumulators. All right. I'm getting errors again because those haven't been written yet. Now, if this didn't work, else that meant that we had a number in there that we put in for the hourly rate. So we'll just return. All right. So now we want to calculate the gross pay. All right. So I'm going to come down here. You can see how big this program is getting now. It's going to be, by the time we finish, it'll probably be 300 lines. So private void calculate gross pay. All right. Now we've got this, but again, that's just the regular gross pay. That's not what I want. But remember, when we wrote this for that last console program, that being console 3, we wrote a routine in there that handled the gross pay. So now I can go in and I can copy every bit of this. Okay. Every bit that I have in there, I'm going to probably have to remove or make a couple modifications, but not too many. So I'm going to come in here. And now I'm onto my calculate gross pay. And I'm going to paste this in. All right, so let's see what we have that what the system doesn't understand so far. We've got hours and rate that it doesn't get. All right. So what are hours and rate? What is this stuff? All right. Well, hours is equal. Now we can do a convert dot to decimal, and we can grab txt hours dot text, hours work dot text. We don't have to check it now because we already checked it earlier, and that should be hours. And then we want another decimal that's called, let's call it h rate, and that'll be equal to convert dot to decimal txt hourly rate dot text. So now we have those. All right, and I have to make this then h rate. Now let's just change this to rate. That's okay. So now everything in here looks, at least, it looks like it's working. All right, we don't have to return anything here. But what we can do now is say txt gross pay dot text equal gross dot toString and print that out. Whoops, that should be printed out in currency format. All right, so that's the first thing that we want to do. We also have to update our accumulators. What are those? That's this stuff up here. The total number of gross pays we have. We also want to do the total gross pay amount and the average gross pay. And we call this up here gross pay. So down here, when I'm creating it, what we just saw here, this has to be gross pay. And so does that. And so does that. And I don't need a gross in here anymore. All right. Now, what's left? Well, if you remember, we had this thing in here that I just commented out that I called update accumulators. Okay, that's going to give me an error because that hasn't been written yet. Okay, so I'm going to go and put that in here right below what I just wrote. All right. And what do we have in here? We already did this. So we want to increment these three and display them. So I think that's everything. We can now get rid of this. Okay. And hopefully, at least, we're going to see in just a moment, we now have a working program. All right, we're going to check it out in just a second. One thing I want to do first is this to date. But this one I didn't keep up to date. Now, these two are now doing the same exact thing. That's, for lack of better words, that's kind of stupid. So I'm taking lines 115 through 150, so about 40 lines, whatever it is, and I'm replicating them. Why should I do that? All right. And what we'll do in here instead is we're just going to call in here. I'm going to write another routine. I'm going to grab all of this code out of here. All right. And in my buttons calculation, I'm just going to call validate and calculate. It's a stupid name, but it's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to change this to validate and calculate. And then right below this, I'm going to put in here paste all that back in, and back here I needed paren. All right, it's got to be up near 300 lines now, I bet. Darn close. Let's see if I missed anything, if it works, if it doesn't work. All right. I really should have been checking it along the way, but I didn't. So, all right. All right, empty first name. That's good. Empty last name. That's good. Invalid hours worked. Invalid hours worked. Hours worked out of range. Hours worked out of range. Oops. Well, there's an error right there, so we'll have to fix that. So let's change this to 40. Invalid hourly rate. invalid hourly rate, invalid hourly rate, invalid hourly rate. Okay, that's all working. Okay, other than that one little hiccup, and let's also see, I'm just going to change this to 50 and a 10. If it gives me 550 here, then the overtime is working as well. And it is. Good. So there's one little hiccup for the hours worked I've got to look at. Then we're going to go back and take a few minutes and talk about everything that's in here. So, not sure what it's missing there, if anything, but you can see that to begin with, I've created about a half dozen program constants. And just like we had before, minimum hours worked, maximum hours, so that's the minimum and maximum you can work per week. That's the minimum hourly rate. That is the maximum hourly rate. Whoops, wrong, Jeff. This is the max number of hours worked, no overtime. This is the overtime rate. So if it changed from time and a half to double time, all we have to change would be that to a 2. That's all. All right. And these are pretty self-explanatory, but again, hours worked, 8, gross pay, total number of gross pays, total gross pay amount, and average gross pay amount. So hopefully by putting in a little documentation, I'm making it a little easier to understand. All right. Now, if you either click the menu item here, let me grab this, I'm going to move it so they're together. So if you either click the menu item for exiting, or if you click the exit button, in both cases, you call exit program or not. So we're calling a routine from a button click. We're calling a routine from a menu click. That routine is the same thing we've been doing all semester. Then going on, this is if we click the clear button. This is if we click the clear menu item. All right. And in either case, we call clear all, which basically clears out all of our fields that we want cleared, and it sets the focus to our first field where we are inputting something. All right. And again, that happens if we call the clear button or click the clear button, or if we click the menu item. Then we've got our calculate. And with our calculate button or from our calculate menu item, we call validate, and calculate. So again, we are calling another routine from the same routine from both a button and from a menu item. Again, that's one of the reasons that you break a program up into separate routines, so you can call it from multiple places. The other one is now each routine is doing one thing. So we've got one routine to validate the first name, one routine to validate the last name, one routine to validate the hours worked, one routine to validate the hourly rate. If any of those fail, we return. But if they succeed, we go from validate first name to validate last name, from validate last name to validate hours worked, from validate hours worked to validate hourly rate, from validate hourly rate to calculate gross pay. And our calculate gross pay, I pull that out almost directly from what we used previously. And I tried to put comments in here as well. Finally, we go in and we update all of our accumulators. All right. In here has shown what? The use of. Notice one thing we don't have in here. One thing we do not have in here. All right. That we had in the console app. There are no while loops in here. We don't have to because of the way that it's written. All right. You'll find usually you'll use while loops more often. You will use them when you are writing console apps than when you're writing GUI apps. Now, I don't mean to say that you'll never use them for a GUI app. I just mean you won't use them as often. All right. So what I want to do next, I want to do four more things in class today. The first thing, and I want to make sure everybody knows this, I am going to change. Yes, I'm going to change just this week only. All right. But what you were all supposed to do, even though we did it as a class, what you were all supposed to do was everybody was supposed to, from these extra exercises, everyone, as soon as I can get that to come up, come on, yeah, come on. All right. You were all supposed to do exercise 2-1, which is here, there we go, and exercise 3-1. I did them in class. You could either code along with me or do them by yourself, but you were supposed to go in and do extra 2-1 and extra 3-1. Now, probably half the class didn't. So I'm going to extend the due date on that till tomorrow at midnight. If, and really it's a way to get some points in the bank. Each one of these were worth 25 points. If you do not have them turned in by midnight tomorrow, you'll lose all those points. You have them turned in, you'll get 50 points. If you turn them in late, all right, I'll dock you some points, but you'll still get some points. All right, this was the homework, 2-1 and 3-1. In addition, all right, what we did as a class, we did this. You all got sent these 22 chapters of written tests. We went over chapters 1, 2, and 3 written tests as a class. I gave you the answers, but I still want you to turn those in. All right. Probably half the people in the class have turned them in, and half the people in the class have not turned them in. All right. That's also due tomorrow by midnight. All right. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of class today, and there was nobody live where we've got people live here now, that if you want to do this, this is what I showed at the beginning of class. I'd have to come in and create 4 new repos, 4 new GitHub repositories. But I made a folder here on my desktop called Jeff Scott AWD1100-HOTS. Jeff Scott AWD1100-written tests, Jeff Scott AWD1100-homework, and Jeff Scott AWD1100-labs. You can create 4 folders like this as well. Make 4 different GitHub repositories. All right. Do your Git and Knit and all of your other stuff. Then you can put your HOTS in that folder. You can put your written tests in that folder. You can put your homeworks in that folder, and you can put your labs in that folder. By doing that, it's a little more work, but you're not working with a one humongous folder that's real huge all the time. If you want to do it that way, and just if you want to have one folder and do everything in there, do it. If you want to have one folder or multiple folders, one for each thing, do that. I need to get, if you have not sent me an invite to your folders, you need to do that. What I'd like to have everybody do, some of yours, I've been able to read the stuff. All right. One way or another, I've graded everybody's first test. Those of you, I think, that have turned in the written tests, I've graded those. All right. I have not graded the homework yet. I will do that tonight. All right. But please, if you think about it, just send me an email by the end of this tape, and just put your name on it, and and then say the name of my GitHub repo is, so I know what it is. Because some of you are using nicknames or other names, and it's very hard for me to find that stuff. All right. And it just makes it that much easier for me. If you make 4 of these, then send me an email with all 4 of the names. All right. So that's the first thing I wanted to make sure you knew. And that was that the homework, if you have not done the homework and or you have not done the written tests, they are due by tomorrow. All right. That's the first thing. Second thing, right now, I'm going to go over chapter 6. You're going to find that some of the stuff in chapter 6, some of it I've already gone over. How to code methods, how to call methods, I've talked about those. We haven't really gotten into optional parameters, named arguments. I'll go over all of this stuff. All right. Tuples, depending on your point of view, all right, they're either a really cool thing or they're terrible and I never want to use them. You don't have to use those at all this semester. You'll notice it's only 4 or 5 pages, but we will talk about them. We will talk about events and delegates. I will update the future value app as they have done. Okay. Plus, I'll make sure that we write it and we're doing input validation, and we are doing putting stuff in it in their own methods or their own functions. All right. That's the second thing I want to do, is to go over this. Then the third thing I want to do is update the future value app. And then finally, I also want to update the invoice total app. All right. And then we'll see where we are time-wise after that point. So I'm going to just right now start on chapter 6. As it says, so far we've been writing, basically, you've been double-clicking a button and putting code there. All right. In this chapter, as it says, we'll learn how you can code methods that can be called from other methods. What does that mean? I just showed you that. I showed you how we called methods from both a button click event and a menu click event. All right, as it says, this will help you to logically divide your code into manageable parts. Why do you do that? Two main reasons. Number one is what I mentioned to you before. You are doing what's called modularizing your code. So you're putting, if you've got a routine that does, or if you've got a program that should do X, Y, and Z, you're writing one method that'll do X, one that'll do Y, and one that'll do Z. In an actual application development environment, and this is the second reason for doing this, these programs might be thousands of lines long, hundreds to thousands or more. So you might have groups of people working on different portions of a program. So by breaking it up, as it says, into manageable parts, if you've got, again, X, Y, and Z, like I mentioned, one group can be working on part X, one group can be working on part Y, and one group can be working on part Z. If you work for a big company, that's typically the way it is. If you work for a small company or a mom and pop type of shop, you might be the only programmer. It just depends. I mean, think about it. If you worked for Google, all right, you wouldn't be the only programmer working there. We always joked, and I don't think this is necessarily funny, but when I was coding professionally, all right, the project that we were working on, the one that I spent 2 years working on, I had about 10,000 lines of code. You might think, well, that's a lot. Yeah, but the whole project, all right, when the windshield was the code, we were just a little bit of it. And that's probably the way it was. All right, so we're going to talk about all this stuff right now. And I think that if I do this, let's see, I think that's hung. So let me do it again. All right. All right. So when I broke these things up, as you saw me break them up into pieces, each one of those pieces can be called a function, or it can be called a method, and it even has other names. It just depends on the book that you read. All right. And this is the syntax for doing that. So if you remember, I wrote private, bool, validate first name, etc. What's the difference between public and private? If something is public, all right, not only can I call it from my program, but at least conceivably, other people could call it from their programs. Or if I'd written two different programs, I could have them speak to one another through public methods. All right. If something is private, it can only be called from within the program that you're working on. And since right now we're only working with one, all right, private seems to make the most sense. And after public or private, you put the type that is supposed to be returned from the method. If the method returns nothing, if this return type, if there isn't one, you put in the word void. But you saw that I had, private bool because they returned true or they returned false. Then you put the name of the method, validate first name, validate last name, or whatever. And then if that method needs anything passed into it, you pass it in as what are called parameters inside of parentheses. All right. Do I expect all of this, 100% of it, to make sense? I'm expecting that after we go through this and hopefully you've read the chapter, that it'll at least make some sense. That's all I'm expecting. So here's an example that returns a decimal and it has one parameter passed into it. When you pass a parameter into a method, you have to give it a name and you have to let the method know what type it is. So this is a decimal that'll be referred to as subtotal. Then below that, they've got a method that has 3 parameters passed in. It's their future value. Now, what you probably noticed, or maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but in the program that I just rewrote for you, we either didn't have anything in here ever, or maybe we did once or twice. All right. I broke kind of a cardinal rule, and that is I made a lot of my variables global. And what I mean by global, we looked at this before, but I define these variables, these here, outside of any method. That means that they are available anywhere in here. I can just use them without having to pass them back and forth, up and down, whatever. If I had declared them inside of a routine and I wanted to use them in another routine, then I would have had to have passed them as what are called parameters or arguments. But I made them, these are all global to the program. That's not the best way of doing things. All right. But again, it's the old crawl, walk, run method. All right. And if you don't know what I mean, again, I always give the example of, I've got 3 daughters. 2 of them are in their 30s and one of them she's in her 20s. But all of them took swim lessons. And wouldn't you know it, I mean, literally, my oldest daughter especially, the first day she wanted to jump right in the deep end before they did anything. No, they had them crawl by going in the kiddie pool and getting used to that. Then they had them walk, where they went into the shallow end of the regular pool. And then eventually they had them run when they went off the diving board. And that's kind of what we're doing. So we're transitioning over right now from crawling to walking. And we'll eventually get to the point where we're running, or hopefully we get to that point. All right. So I can sit and read this to you, but I don't want to any more than you probably want to hear me read. Again, read the chapter. Read each chapter in the book. I would strongly suggest before you take your next hands-on test on Thursday. All right. Just quickly reread chapters 1 to 3, but go back and read, if you haven't read them, chapters 4, 5, and 6. Tomorrow, I will again give you a pretest that will be very similar to the regular test. All right, the regular test will probably only have a couple problems on it. I don't know. I haven't written it yet, right? If there is one out there, I'll look at it. Usually I modify them anyway. All right, so you can read that on your own. All right, so how to call methods. You put the name of the method in. You don't need the word this. You can put that in there. I don't want to go over what this means. I don't typically even use that. All right, but you call the method, and then you have to put parens after it. And if that method requires any arguments, you put them in the parentheses. That's it. The IntelliSense will typically pick that up for you. So if you put in the name of the method, it'll let you know whether it needs some arguments in the parentheses or whether they're just parens. But if you are calling a method, if you are creating a method, that method has to have parentheses in it. That's how the system knows. That is how the system knows, all right, that it's a method and not a variable. All right. You typically will pass, if you've got parameters you have to pass in, you will typically pass those parameters in by what is called position. Now, I don't know if I did this on mine or not, so let's take a quick look. I don't want to waste my time or yours. No, by making everything global, we didn't have to worry about that. No, we didn't. And so every one of these has just got, so again, private, whether the return value, the name of the method, parentheses, and then in the parentheses, any arguments that are needed. You may have noticed this, you may not have, but if I go back up here, come on, keep going, keep going, keep going. There we go. We've got, for our menu item, And for our button, we do have parameters in there. We've never talked about these. All right. Sender is basically, so the sender right there really is the button. The sender here is the menu item. All right. And these event arguments, they're things that get passed in. For now, we'll look at them as being kind of system things that we don't have to worry about. All right. What would be nice when you think about this, maybe you agree with me on this and maybe you don't, but what would be nice, now when I run this and I come in here and let's just say I do put in a name. Oops. Wouldn't it be nice if when I come in here, I couldn't do this? In other words, since that hours worked is a numeric field, it would be nice if the only things I could put in there would be numbers or maybe a single decimal point, or maybe that I could also hit my backspace key. But if I tried hitting any letter, the system would not accept it. Right now, we're handling that by just with an if statement, we're giving them an error and we're removing it. But wouldn't it be nice to just allow numbers in there, or maybe the backspace key for these two fields? I think it would be. So what we'll be getting into in the coming weeks is how you can do that. All right. And in order to do that, what this is all leading up to is we will have to, when we come in here, to do that, we will have to be working with the sender and the event arguments. All right. These event arguments, really, we're not going to use them a lot this year, but let's pretend for a minute that you were creating your own game using C#. And there are games out there with, created by C#. And in that game, you wanted the user to be able to use their mouse. Well, one thing that you could get from the event arguments would be the X and Y position of the mouse. So if you wanted to move it around the screen, all right, there's a place where you might use something like that. Okay. So again, I'm going to let you read this stuff, and I'm trying to demonstrate it. I'm trying to demonstrate it rather than sitting there and just reading to you. All right. So the next thing that's in here are what are called optional parameters. And a lot of people find these really confusing, but they can be really kind of neat. All right. If you look at this example right here, all right, I'm on 175, and it's the second thing down, the calculate future value method with two optional parameters. You can see that we've got here decimal monthly investment, comma, then decimal monthly interest rate equals 0.05 M, comma, int months equal 12. What does that mean? That means that there's actually three different ways, at least, that you can call this. You must pass in a value for this, for the monthly investment. If you do not pass in a value for the monthly interest rate, it defaults to 5%. If you do not pass in a value for months, it gets a default value of 12. So what optional parameters do is they provide default values. So when you call this, you can pass in just one thing. So let's say you passed in 1,000 for the monthly investment. Then it would be 1,000, 5%, and 12. You can pass in two things. So let's say you passed in 1,000, and let's say this was 6%. Then if you didn't pass in a value for this, it would default to 12. If you use these optional parameters, they must be listed last after the non-optional parameters. And if I want to make this one, if I want to pass in this one, I can do this one, and have that be optional. All right. But when you think about it, I can pass in one thing or two things or all three things myself. If I pass in just one, I use these two optionals. If I pass in these two, then that's optional. If I pass in all three, I'm not using any of the optionals. I can't think of any other way to explain it to you other than that. But imagine for just a second, I will add a little bit onto it. So let's say that Rankin Technical College had hired me to do some kind of, I don't know what, but they had to have me do some kind of program for them. And in here, they wanted me to pass in first name, last name, address, city, state, and zip. Those 6 fields. What I've heard at least. About 90% of the people who go to Rankin are from Missouri. So I could put state in there last, and I could have string state equals MO in double quotes, or string state equals double quote Missouri double quote. That way I wouldn't have to pass in the state unless the person was not from Missouri. All right, so that's the kind of way that you would typically use it. All right. Now, if you didn't like it so far, you'll probably like what's coming up now even less, because these are those lambda operators that we talked a little bit about yesterday. All right. And we looked at this yesterday, and they're showing that there's another way to rewrite it today. All right. I'm going to suggest that while you're learning this, I'd much rather have you use tried and true as opposed to all the new, you know, hoity-toity stuff, and have you understand how to do it the way that probably is done 80 to 90% of the time. And that's why I'm not spending a lot of time on these lambda expressions now. Right before we get into databases, which is the last half of the class, we will talk about lambda expressions, and then they will have to be used. But for now, I'm not going to put anything on a test with expressions or expression bodies and lambdas, not where we are right now. That would be foolish. All right, refactoring, another thing that's either really cool or really stupid, depending on what your point of view is. If you remember, when I went into this program that we just did, I pulled stuff out manually and moved it around, created new things, etc. Technically, I didn't have to do that. What you can do is, like in this example right here, if you grabbed that information that you see in mustard yellow, and then you did a control period, so you held down on the control key, tap the period key, all right, it's going to bring up some options. If you chose extract method, it'll create a brand new method for you with that code in it. So it's a way of moving things around. I don't like to do that. Why? Because if I do it like that, I'm giving the software more control than I want it to have. I am letting the software implicitly decide how something is going to be done. I'd rather explicitly myself. All right. Not everybody agrees with that. I could never tell if you use this or you never used it. So I guess you'd have to do what you'd be most comfortable with. All right. Okay. The next thing that's in here then is how to pass arguments by reference and then by value. And one thing I didn't provide it today, but I did save it. That was this thing that we were working on yesterday. Where is it? This thing where I gave you all those examples. So I've got to send that out to you today. But let's add some more stuff onto this. All right. So I'm going to come down to the bottom. And now this is going to, in fact, near the top, I'm going to put in here chapter 5 stuff. All right. And now I'm going to go down to the bottom, and you may have guessed it already, but I'm going to go down to the bottom here, and we're going to add some chapter 6 stuff. All right. Now, I showed you an example like this yesterday, but I want to make sure everybody gets it. What do I mean? Well, I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to type in here right now, int n1 for number 1 equal 12, int n2 equal 34, int answer equal add 2. We're going to pass in n1 and n2. All right, so someplace later on in my program, I'm going to create a routine. Private int add 2 int number 1 int number 2 return number 1 plus number 2. This gives us a chance to review a lot of the things that we've already talked about, such as this is declaring and initializing 2 different variables. This is declaring a variable here, but the way we're initializing it is we're giving up program control. We are calling a routine somewhere else in our program called add2, and we are passing in n1 and n2. So what's really happening here, what's actually happening is it's doing it, and it's calling it like this, 12, 34. Copies. It doesn't pass in n1. It passes in a copy of n1. It doesn't pass in n2. It puts in a copy of n2. Why does that even matter? All right. And notice their actual names are n1 and n2. These are called their formal names, and I changed them. So instead of n1, I call it number 1. Instead of n2, I call it number 2. I could have still called them n1 and n2. Just wanted to show you that you could do it that way. Now, let's say that we've done all this, and now we want to type in here, we want to say right line, the sum of, I'm just going to say 12 plus 34 is, and I want to put in there answer. All right. And right now, the way this is written, that will say the sum of 12 plus 34 is 46. Exactly what we want. But we're working with copies in here. Since we're working with copies, if we wanted to, it would be a dumb thing to do, but we could change the value. So I could come in here and say number 1 equals 111, number 2 equals 222, and then return number 1 plus number 2. And guess what? This would now say the sum of 12 plus 34 is 333. It never changed this value. It never changed this value. It changed the values of these copies that were in there. All right. And I mean, this is just something you may have to read it and look at the examples to wrap your head around it. But this is called pass by copy. This is called pass by copy. All right. Because you're passing a copy of those variables. On the other hand, what if I wanted to be able to change those values? So in other words, what if I had here int n1 and I didn't give it a value, and int n2 and I didn't give it a value? Well, it's like, wow, how can you do that? Then I can come in here and I can say ref here and ref there, and I have to say ref here and I have to say ref there. Now I'm not passing in a copy. I'm passing in the address in the computer's memory where N1 and N2 live. So now if I do this, I have changed. I have given N1 a value of 111, N2 a value of 222, and answer a value of 333. This is going to be stupid now. I wouldn't want to say that. I would probably just want to say the sum is something like that. But what I want you to understand is when you do a pass by copy, it's a copy of those variables values. When you do a pass by reference, it's the actual computer address of where those variables live in memory. Okay. So any change you make is a permanent change. And I may have given this example before, I don't know. But imagine where I work out of, when I go into the campus, I work out of 751 North Parr Road in Wentzville. If for some reason tomorrow, and it's not going to happen, but if for some reason tomorrow Rankin moved out, that address would still be 751 North Parr Road. It would just have different inhabitants. In the same way, when you pass something in as a ref, you're saying, I want to be able to change its value in memory. So I want it to be a permanent change. When we did this before, and we were passing it by copy, we were only changing the copies. But if you pass it by ref, you're making permanent changes. And that's what they're saying in here. All right. Now, their examples may be totally different than mine, but they are used the same way. So as it says, when you call a method, you can pass arguments by value, or what I call by copy, or by reference. If you pass by value, the value or a copy, it says it can't be changed, all right, by the calling method. Okay, that's not true. You can change it in the calling method. You shouldn't. If you pass by reference, you can make a permanent change. Okay, now says by default, all arguments are passed by value. That's going to be true until we get to chapter 8. To pass by reference, you use ref. You can use ref, you can use ref, you can use out, and you can use in. All right, I don't want to get into in and out right now because it's just going to confuse you. All right, and with what we're doing right now, if you have at least a fundamental understanding of what I just mentioned there with ref, you're good. All right. All right. They do get in and talk about this if you want to know more about in and you want to know more about out. We've already used out. We used that in here. Remember? Right there. That's out. All right. Let me just explain the difference between in and out, just so you hear it. If you pass something in as an in parameter, it's already been set. It's already been inputted. If you pass something in as an out, it has not yet been set. Output parameter in the routine itself. So in means it's already been set, and out means you're going to set it in there. All right. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I'm just not reading to you right now. All right. And the examples that are in here are good. What's good or bad, depending upon your point of view, is as the language has continued, the C# language, as it has continued to mature, one of the things that Microsoft actually does a very good job of is they talk to developers, especially developers at big companies, and they'll say, what can we do for you to make this language easier for you to use? And the reason they do that is they don't want people to stop using their language and go to somebody else's. So when you see this stuff, 7.0 and later, 7.2 and later, 8.0 and later, 11.0 and later, these are all just things that have been added to the language. That means that they're optional to use. All right. That's why they'll say something. Another way of doing this is I'm teaching you by and large the fundamental stuff. Why? Because again, That's the stuff that's out there in 80% of the code that's out there, and it'll work. All right. The new stuff will still work. All right. But you've got to do it correctly. And the old stuff is the way most people are doing it anyway. All right. Now, it says here that C# introduced a new feature called tuples that allow you to work with simple data structures. And we have not talked about data structures yet. All right. We will talk about our first data structure next week in chapter 8 when we go over what are called arrays. You don't have to worry about them right now. You don't have to worry about them for this test. But one of the big things about tuples that makes them kind of cool is everything that we've done so far in this class. Every time we've returned something, whether it's a bool, and all this program was bools, or it's been voids. But if we return an int here, or we return a decimal, or we return a whatever, what we've been working with so far are what are known as elementary data items. They also go by the name of scalar data items, SCALAR, meaning we can only return one thing. What if I wanted to return a bunch of stuff? Well, when we get to chapter 8 and we talk about arrays, you'll learn how you can return more than one thing. But if you return more than one thing with an array, it has to be all integers or all booleans or all decimals, etc. Now, with tuples, you can return multiple things, and they can be different types of things that you return. So there is a string and an integer, for example. All right. So tuples are something that were introduced a few years ago in C# 7.0. This is the first time we've looked at what's called a data structure. Now, some of you have already heard this little spiel. Some of you probably have not, but I'm going to very quickly give it to you. All right. And gives me a chance to come out here. And what do I want? I want, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, I can't think of the word, but it'll come to me as I'm talking. Okay, very quick story, very quick. When I was a freshman in college at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, one of the first classes that I took was a class in child psychology. Why? I don't know. I just took it. I walked into class the first day. I'm not exaggerating. It was a typical Missouri day in the summer. It was like August, but it was about 95 degrees. There was one window in the room that I went into. All right. And it was closed. There were two doors at the back. They were open, but there was no air circulating in the room at all. And there were 300 of us in the room. All right. What does this have to do with anything? Well, the teacher was late that day, and it was the first day of class, but one of the teaching assistants came in and said, "Hey, the be about 10 minutes." They didn't do this, but just imagine. All right, that's what I was looking for. Just imagine that what the teaching assistant had done was they gave each one of us a Lego. Now that'd be kind of stupid, but just play along with me, so to speak. So they had 300 different Lego pieces in there. All right, we each got a piece. And they said, he'll be 10 or 15 minutes, play with your Lego piece. Well, let's face it, how much can you play with a single Lego piece? But if I talk to the people in my row and we put all of ours together, and then we got with the other rows, maybe we could build something, a car, a house, a whatever. All right. If you look at each one of those individual Legos, they're an elementary data item or a scalar data item. If you put them together so that we're actually building something, that's a data structure. All right. So what you are allowed to do with tuples is you are allowed to literally create a data structure. All right. Now, it says they can be used in place of classes or other types that we're not even going to talk about until chapter 12. They can have names or they can be unnamed. All right. I've just given you a couple pages. I will tell you, you can use them as a return type for a method. We are not going to use these. All right. Why? Because I think, again, it's too difficult a concept to be throwing at people 6 days into a semester. All right. But feel free to read this. All right. And they're pretty cool, but they're a more advanced topic, is what I'm telling you. All right. I'm going to jump right into, in fact, it is looks like it's 10:45. Let's take 10 minutes. And when I come back, I'll pick it up here. Let's see how much we have left in the chapter. We're on 188, and we've got about 10 to 15 pages left. All right. So let's take a break. Please come back at 10:55. And when you come back, we will finish up the chapter at that time. I'll be right back. All right, it's 10:55, so I'm going to continue on. The next section talks about how to work with events and delegates. I'm trying to think of the best way to kind of introduce this to you. And this is what I came up with, good, bad, or indifferent. You already know this, that if I go and double click on a button, I bring up that button's click event. That's nothing new. All right, you know that. But what you may or may not know is if I come down here, if I go back to my design mode and I click on that button, so far we've worked with everything that's in here in the properties window. But if I go almost all the way to the right, I've got 5 different icons here. If I go to the 4th one that looks like a lightning bolt, all right, that shows me the different routines. And you'll notice that right now I've got a button clear click 1 in there. All right. Now, what you'll notice is if you look in here, there's a bunch of other things for which I have not written any code. In other words, these are all the different events right here. These are all of the different events that that I could sit there and write something for. And you might say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Well, let's see if I can find something. All right. I'm going to try to set this up. We're going to see if it's going to work, and I'm going to do it in a couple of ways so you can really see it. But when I when I take my mouse and I put it over the calculate button, I want that button to turn, I don't know, I want it to turn, let's say red, okay, because it really stands out. So here's my calculate button right here, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to find an event for that button that's called mouse enter. Calculate. I'm going to call it, try that again. Yeah, that got all screwed up. That was on me. Doggone it. My internet dropped for a second. Okay. So, all right. I'm going to go back down to here. Yeah, I'm going to change this. I'm going to remove that. So that's okay. And I'm going to make my own event and I'm going to call it BTN calculate underscore mouse enter. And I'm going to hit enter. And there it made it. And I gave it the name that I told it to have. All right. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say the name of my button. So BTN calculate dot back color equal, I think it's be like color dot red. I could be wrong on this, but we're going to find out. Color dot, oh, maybe it isn't color dot red. Okay. Well, we're going to find it out right now. Dot back color. I don't think I can just say red. Yeah, it doesn't like that. I'm going to check. Well, it says we should be able to do it that way, color dot red, but for some reason it doesn't seem to like it. So let's look. WinForm, that's what we're using. The name of the button dot back color equal color dot red. But it doesn't like it. So let's see. It says show a fix. I'll need to use system.drawing. I need to add a using statement up there to be able to play with color in code. So that added this line of code right there. All right. So let's see if that fixed it. In other words, it's not an error anymore, but it's not going to work the way I want it to. And that is now I run the program. Now it's red, but it's still, I don't want it to be red anymore. Okay, well, then I have to put code into another routine. All right. And So I'm going to go back again to my button in here. And in here, now I'm going to find, I put something in here for mouse enter. Let's find one for mouse leave. So I'm going to put in here BTN calculate. Mouse leave and hit enter. Now I'm going to say when it comes back, so BTN calculate dot back color equal color dot, is there a control in here? Oh, we'll make it blue just so you can see it. All right, so color dot blue. All right, let's see if that works. Whoops, I don't need that there. I need a semicolon. Come on, where are you? I need a semicolon right there. All right, so it's going to be gray. When I put my mouse over it, it gets red. When I leave, it turns blue. Red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. Now, that may or may not mean anything to you. You may care, you may not care. Totally fine. But I want to show you something about this that's pretty cool, in my opinion, for whatever my opinion is or is not worth. All right, I'm going to go back again, and it doesn't matter. All right, I'm going to go back again on my button, and I'm going to remove the ones I just put in. There's a reason I'm doing this. All right, I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this. Notice once I've removed both those, if I go back out to my code, all right, this is still here because it's stuff I put in. So I have to manually get rid of it. Now I can. Boom. All right. Okay. So big deal. Who cares? Why did you show us this, Jeff? I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to go back into here. In fact, I'll use the exit one. And I'm going to write the same routine, but with one change. So in my exit, I'm going to go over to mouse enter, but rather than calling it BTN calculate or BTN clear or BTN exit, I'm going to call this BTN underscore mouse enter. Just, oops, enter, just like that. Okay. And just like we did before, I'm going to say BTN let's see. Oh, I'm trying to keep this where you'll all be able to understand it. So I'm going to say BTN. I'm just going to change all of them. Exit dot back color equal. We'll make it white. That's fine. BTN. Let's do all of them. So I'm going to say in here BTN calculate dot back color is white and BTN clear dot back color is white. Okay, first of all, let's see if that worked. So file, save all, run the program. Notice they're all white. That's good, that worked. All right, let's see if we can change it back with the mouse leave. We're going to reverse that. So in other words, I'm going to come back in here, but what I want to do is I want to be able to call this from any one of the buttons. What are you talking about? Well, right now, this BTN mouse enter is associated with this button. I want to associate it with any of the three buttons. So I'm going to go over to my clear button and I'm going to come in and find that mouse enter again. And once I do that, I'm going to click the down arrow and I'm going to find BTN mouse enter. Now I'm using the same routine for that one. And I'm going to come in here and do it for this one too. BTN mouse enter. All right. And then in this one, I'm going to come in here and make a mouse leave. All right. So this will be a BTN underscore mouse leave. All right. And hitting enter in here, I'm going to change all these. All right. So I want the back color now to be black for each one of these. And I want the foreground color, which is the color of the text, to be white. All right. But I want to be able to call this from any of those buttons. So again, I'm going to go over right now with my calculate. I've got the mouse enter and the mouse leave. With my clear, I've got the mouse enter, but I want to add to that by hitting my down arrow, the mouse leave. Now those are both in here, and same for the exit. All right, I'm going to save it and run my program. And now notice they go back and forth when I do this. All right, I guess I would have had to have changed the foreground color. All right, so down here where I put all that stuff, all right. So on here, I have to come in and put in my foreground color, and I got to make it black. Now, when I come in, I can go back and forth between these. If I move off, they're black buttons with white text. If I touch any of them, they're white buttons with black text. You can see that it's going back and forth. And I'm sharing the same event with multiple controls. Now, if you think to yourself, that's fine, that's really stupid, then all I have to do is come in here, highlight all of the code that's inside of the curly braces, and just comment it out, and then comment this out. I'm going to leave it in there so you can see it, but it's now commented out. So now my buttons are the regular color and they don't change. All right. So as far as why I showed you that, what I showed you, etc., what I wanted to get across to you, all right, was that we just went in and we created our own event. When you double click anything, now some of you did this on your test, purposely, accidentally, I don't have a clue. But for instance, you double clicked inside of that box, and let's say that one, and you've got this stuff, and this is code that you just left it there, and that's a waste of space, and it can be confusing. So I want to show you how to get rid of these. The first one is the text box for the first name. So I'm going to highlight the text box for the first name. Then inside of here, with the lightning bolt chosen, you'll notice that it says TXT first name text changed. That's the default event. I'm going to highlight all that and remove that. Now notice that code is gone. So let's get rid of the one for the total gross pays by doing the same thing. So here's the total gross pays right there. And I think it was the label. There it is, the click event. I highlight it, I remove everything that's in there. I go back, and now that's gone. Now, I think, pardon my French, but that's a horse's ass way of them making you do that. But I've never found another way to get rid of the stuff. If you just go in and manually remove that stuff, you'll probably get an error because it'll still be here underneath in your properties window underneath the events. All right. Okay. So if you double click on any control, you get the default event for that control. You may or may not have noticed, but for the text box, when I double clicked on it, I got a text changed event. If I'm asked to put my name, my first name into a text box, and I put in JEFFREY, there's actually 7 text changed events that take place, one for every keystroke I make. All right. So you can, all I'm trying to get across to you is with what we've done thus far in this class, virtually everything that we've done has been using the buttons click event. And by and large, that's what you do, other than writing your own routines. But you do have in here, so even like under a button, all right, now we've got something in the click event and we've got the mouse enter and the mouse leave. All right. But you'll notice there must be 20 or 30 or more different things we could put stuff into. All right. And that's pretty much what they're saying in here. Also, you may or may not have noticed with this, but when I come over here, if I click here and I go over, let's say, for example, to this back color changed. All right. If I click on that, usually when you put your mouse over, I guess it's not doing, oh, down on the bottom of the page here, it gives a message of what's happening there. It says it's the event raised when the value of the background color is changed on a control. All right. So if you need a little bit more, you can click on it and then you'll get the description down on the bottom. All right. Now, the next part that's in here, I'm going to explain to you. I'm going to recommend that unless you have to, you never use this. All right. With event wiring, in my humble opinion, is the process of making sure what you have entered into code and what the system enters into code for its own variables and values, that they mesh. All right. And what's going to happen? You may have seen this already. You may not have. I don't know. But whoops, I don't want to do that. But with what we've looked at so far, if I go into the form for this, it brings that up. You know this. All right. But if I go in under where I have the form here, all right, I got a form designer and I've got a form.resx. I'm going to open the form designer. All right. And if you look in here, this, when I put all this stuff on the screen or on my form designer, this is what got created for me. These are all system things. All right. So there's a bunch of system stuff that got generated for me. All right. And I don't even know what a lot of it means because I've never had to use it. All right. And this ResX has got some more system stuff in it. But what you're typically going to find is if you look enough at this stuff, just cancel that. I want to close that one, and I want to close that one. There we go. And let me do a file, save all. There we go. But if I keep looking in here, notice there's properties. All right. These are more system settings right here. If I keep going, there's references. All right. Those are more system settings. Those are those using statements that we put in at the beginning. This app config, this we won't care about at all until we get to talking about databases. All I'm trying to tell you is that not only when you create a program, not only do you have your files, etc., in there, your stuff, but there's system stuff as well. All right. And with event wiring, what it typically does is it goes and it wires up what you're doing to what the system expects you're doing. All right. And I don't know if that even makes sense or not. All right. But let's look at the description here on the bottom of the page. When you use the form designer to generate an event handler, a statement is also generated in the designer.cs file. All right, that's what I showed you. To wire an event, C# uses what's called a delegate, which is an object that represents a method. Now, probably at least, you all know what a delegate is. It's like when you delegate or a delegate is somebody who's got somebody's authority to do something. That's pretty much what this is. Later, we'll talk about delegates in like chapter 13 or 14, and they'll pretty much mean the same thing. All right. So again, what I'm telling you is really, it's not that you don't have to worry about this, but it's that typically you're not going to want to play with this. Now, how to handle multiple events with one event handler, that's what I showed you. I showed you how to handle multiple events where we changed all three button colors, background and foreground colors, using the same routine that we shared between all three buttons. That was not a good example, to be honest with you. Probably, probably the one they show in the chapter here is better than the one I showed you. All right. Again, I'm not going to go through that, and it won't be on any test that I give. All right. The last thing that's in here, and I believe this is it for the chapter, we're going to find out right now. Yep. Is going over and having another version of the future value program. So let's take a look at that. All right. So I believe I put that into invoice total. There's future value. Good. So what I'm going to do, and this is kind of what we did yesterday. First, I'm going to close this. I'll leave that open. I'm going to copy everything that's in there. I highlighted it with a Control A. Then I'm doing a Control C to copy it all. All right. Then I'm going to go and add a new project. All right. And I'm going to put in there, again, Windows Forms. Make sure I choose the .NET Framework, C#. This will now be future value GUI 02. There it is. I'm going to paste that in. So that's everything I had from before. That's a really bad, ugly color to use with gray. So let's change the back color. Let's make it the green, and we'll change these to a darker green. All right, so that's okay. Now, to save myself a little time here and to do it the right way, I'm going to click my calculate button. There it is. Then I'm going to click my clear button. There that is. Then I'm going to click I don't want this one well, I will in a second. Then I'm going to click my exit button. There it is. All right, now, what I want to do now is I want to copy over all my code from the last one. So here is these are my constants here, declare and initialize constants. Got those, good. Now into my calculate, I'm going to change this around in just a moment. But into my calculate, I'm going to grab all of this code just so I don't have to retype it. All right. That's just a lot to retype otherwise. So I've got everything in between the curly braces. Yes, I do. Copy and paste. All right, then I'm going to do the same thing from my clear button. Copy and paste. And then I'm going to do the same thing from my exit button. Copy and paste. All right. Now I don't need this one anymore, so I'm going to close that. I don't need the code from that one anymore. So let's see. Yeah, this is the one I did yesterday. So this is all my new stuff. All right. So if I do a file, save all, and I make this the active project by using set as startup project, and I run this, should be my green one. And if I put in 100, 7.5, and 10 years, I think it was 17,000 something. Part and put it back together again. For some reason, my internet keeps dropping. I don't know why. All right. So I'm going to start with the easy stuff just because I can. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to put it into its own new exit program or not. You don't like my names, you could, of course, come up with your own private void exit program or not. Paste that in, move this over. All right, let's make sure that still works. Okay, that works. Now let's grab what we had in here, and I'm going to, for the clear button, and I'm just going to call it clear all. And now we've got that. So let's make sure our clear button works. And that works. Okay. So we've got those two things done already. Now let's take the big thing, okay, which is our calculate button. And let's break this down into a bunch of different routines. Okay. If you remember from yesterday, we've got 1, 2, 3 fields. We've got 3 fields that we have to make sure that the monthly investment is valid, that the yearly interest rate is valid, that the number of years is valid. We've done some of this already. If you remember, there's the monthly investment, and it had to be between $10 and $100, and our interest rate had to be between 2% and 10%, and our years had to be between 1 year and 25 years. So we virtually got just about everything we need. All right. So we've got all this stuff, and we're going to put in here, I'm going to do this very similarly to what I did earlier. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make a Boolean. And I'll make another one. I won't need that result, I don't think. In a minute. Yeah, maybe I will. We'll see. But I'm going to put in another bool that I'm going to call keep going. And I'm going to make that equal to true. All right. So I'm going to come in here and say while I'm putting it into a loop, and I'm going to say keep going equal validate monthly investment. I'm getting an error because that hasn't been written yet. Here's the code I'll need for that right here. All right. So down at the bottom here, I'm going to write in here right now, public, private, bool, validate, monthly investment. All right. And I don't know why that did that, but it did. Well, let's just manually do this. And there's that. Now, it might give me some errors, but we'll fix them right away. Where is it? Validate. There it is. Validate monthly investment. Well, I'm getting a big error because I think I'm missing a curly brace. Probably it's what that is, but I don't know. So let's see. Got one here that I don't need. That fixed a lot. Boy, a lot of me hates the internet. Again, it keeps going down. I don't know why. But I'm going to come in here and say bool result result. And again, I'm going to say another bool ret val equal true, like I did before. All right. So let's see. This is our if. I'm going to move that over. This is our else. I'm going to move that over. And it looks like we're missing a curly brace. All right. This is the problem with moving things the way I'm doing it here. So let's see. Got result. Result equals this. And the out should be monthly investment. All right. The problem is now I'm going to take monthly investment. Okay. And in fact, let's do some of the stuff. Let's do some of the stuff that we were basically taught in that last chapter. So this validate monthly investment. Let's pass monthly investment in, but I'm going to say out monthly investment. All right. Don't worry about the error. That should be fixed in a minute. So where is that written again? There. All right. So let's see. Bool. Okay, it's giving me these errors now because so this will have to say a ret val equal false. So will this. Okay. Now that isn't fixed everything, but it's fixed a bunch of our errors here. So what do we have here? All right, TXT monthly investment. Isn't that what I called it? Oh, great. Okay. The problem is all this copying of code that I did, that's what's screwing this up. So I managed to really muck this up badly. Yeah, I don't want that. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, that might have been everything. I had an extra curly brace in there. And again, as always, that's on me for screwing that up. All right, so it's okay. Good. Okay, it's working. All right. So I've now gone in and I've taken my monthly investment and I've got that in its own routine. Okay. So while keep going, do this. Okay, good. Let's see. All right. If keep going, now keep going is going to be equal to validate yearly interest rate. And I'll put in there another out with, what do we call it? Year. Oh, we did call it yearly interest rate. So that's yearly interest rate. Good. All right, I'm getting the error, of course, because I haven't written that yet. So I can now pull all of this code out of here. Whoops, come on. All the way down. I can go and pull all that code out of there from here down to here. All right. And after I put in my validate monthly investment, I'm going to add another one here, private void validate yearly interest rate out decimal yearly interest rate. All right. And again, I'm going to paste all that in. And just like we did before, bool result, bool ret val equal true. All right. This return will have to be ret val equal false. So will this. And finally, here we'll say return ret val. Okay, that should be a bool. Okay, so that one's fixed. Two of them are now fixed. All right. Now, coming back up here again, what's left? All right, I don't have a semicolon there, so I'm getting that error. Okay. Else, return. Finally, if keep going, then what do we want to do? Then we want to say keep going equal validate number of years, and we want to pass in years as an out variable. All right. So let me grab that. And we'll put that down here under the other one. The other two. Private bool, not bookmark, bool, validate years out int years. Oops, try that again. Now we can go grab all of that code. There's our years. It goes from here down to here. We will again come down here and do a bool result and a bool ret val equal true. All right, these returns will have to be returned false. Not return false, I'm sorry. Ret val equal false. This will have to be a ret val equal, oh my goodness. And return ret val. All right. Else return. All right. Finally, we'll want to come in here and if keep going, we will want to, we'll just write one routine. I'm going to call it calculate and display future value. And we'll put an out in here with, I'm just going to do a calculate future value with an out, and we had in here, we didn't have a future value. Okay. So I'm not going to pass anything for now, at least. We'll see if we can get this to work. Again, we put in here else return. All right, get rid of all that blank space. And private void calculate future value. All right, I don't believe, I think we can print it here also, so we're going to see. And if I'm totally confusing you, just keep hanging there with me for a few more minutes. All right, I am going to change this to calculate and display future value. So give me a second here. So this will be calculate and display. And it will need what? It will need the monthly investment, the yearly interest rate, and the years. All right, now let's give me an error because I don't have those listed down below. So I'm going to move that down here right now. All right, and this will have to, of course, say decimal before each one of these. All right, now let's see. Not implicitly convert type decimal to type int. Oh, that should be an int. That's why. All right. Oh, that's good. Now I've got this here, this while loop. I don't even know if I need a while loop here. Press that. It should come down. We're going to find out right now. Don't worry about this. No, we don't need that result anymore. We do need to keep going. All right. All I did in here was to put things into their own routines. And let's see if I broke anything or if it still works or whatever. We already know that if we run this, don't know why it's not giving me try it again. There we go. If we run this and we put in 100 and 7.5 and 10, it should give us $17,904 and some cents. And it does. That works. Clear works. Exit works. Fantastic. Let's go and make a couple superficial like changes to this. All right. Now, some of you lost points on the test. And if you want to know why you lost points on the test, maybe I was being squirrely about this, but you were told, for example, to change the name of the form. Right mouse click on here, choose rename. FRM, I'm going to call this future value 02. I hit enter and it says, do you want to change the internal files as well? Yes, I do. All right. Plus, you were told to come in here and set your accept button to calculate, to set your cancel button to clear, and to set your start position to center screen. That was worth 5 points. If you didn't do it on either one of the GUI programs, you lost 10 points. So the most you could get was a 90. If you did it on one and not on the other, you lost 5 points. All right. And finally, the view tab order. So that'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Do another view tab order. All right, let's run it again. We put nothing in there. Invalid input, that's exactly what it's supposed to do. Again, invalid input, if we put in something that's too big. Okay, something that's too small. Okay. All right, now we've got the interest rate. That seems to be working. the years. I know we said, I guess it was 10. All right. Everything is working. All right. Plus, when you take a look at it again, when we take a look at this, now our calculate, all right, that's in here, it's still got code in it. I'm not going to deny that, but it basically is a driver. I left these bits in here like this so that I could show you out parameters. All right. I could have also passed those as ref parameters or, would have worked as well. But since they weren't set, actually I can do that. I should be able to do this now. I don't think it's going to give me an error. All right. That's about as clean as I can make this program, in my opinion, for right now. But again, as you put in more code, all right, to try to validate, etc., you end up with more code. So this one has got about 225 lines in it. All right. What I want to do with this one is I do want to clean it up. In other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little prologue at the beginning of each of these things to explain, and I'm going to add some comments. All right. I've got to do that. All right. So they've got their own version of the future value app. I gave you mine. I'm not going to say mine's better. I'm not going to say theirs is better, but they do show you in the designer some of the code that was put in there. It is possible for you to go into this designer file and actually add code, add your own event handlers. It is not recommended. I recommend never opening this file just because of the fact that if you do, it's real easy to do something you didn't mean to do. All right. It happens. All right. So I guess that's it. So a couple more things. Firstly, all right, I've said this before. I'm going to keep saying it. By tomorrow, if you have not turned in extra 2.1, design a simple form, and extra 3.1, put the code in there for that simple form, you must turn that in. If you don't, in the grade book, it'll just, they're each worth 25 points. And in the grade book, it's going to show a 0 for each one. So you'll be down 50 points. Also, as mentioned, I don't know where it is. There it is. Written tests 1, 2, and 3 are due also. I did written test 1, 2, and 3. I did the extra 2.1 and extra 3.1 in class previously. I don't know exactly when I did them. See if we can find them. I'll give a quick look. I don't want to waste anybody's time on this. So let's see. Lecture 1, chapter 1, chapters 2 and 3. There's the pretest. All right, it's either going to be in this one that says day 3, chapters 1 to 3 pretest, or it's going to be in this one, day 2. In one of those two times, all right, I went in there and actually did those. In fact, let's just bring this one up and see if it's this one or not. There it is. There's the grade one right there. All right, so that is in there, both creating the grade one, all right, etc. And I don't know, yes, if you look in here also, there are, I went over the answers to the written tests. So again, it is in day 2, 051623 lecture. It's 3 hours and 48 minutes. And you might say, well, why are you having us do that if you did it? Because there's something to be said for you creating something, even if you're creating it based off of what somebody else has given you. All right. So tomorrow, I am going to give you a pre-test. This pre-test will be sent out by 7 a.m. You will have from 8 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. to work on it. All right. At 9:30 and approximately 9:30 until, I don't know, 11, I'll go over the pretest. After we go over the pretest, I will go over, this is a lot for you to do for this weekend. 4-1, 4-2, 5-1, 5-2, 5-3, 6-1, 6-2. That's 7 problems. We'll do at least 2 or 3 of these, if not 4, as a class tomorrow. You are still required to do them yourselves and turn them in. We will also go over, and we will either do, why aren't you going up? There you go. We will either go through 2-1, translate English to Pig Latin, or we will do 2-2. I don't know why this is stuck, but it is. Maintain student scores. This one I just hate, because I hate Pig Latin. So I'll probably do that one with you. So again, that one will be done. So we will do 3 or 4 from the extra exercises and this one from the projects tomorrow, in addition to going over the pretest. You will be solely responsible for doing the written tests for 4, 5, and 6. So you have a lot of homework for this weekend. Let's stretch that out. Let's make that due a week from tomorrow. All right. And I will update that on everything. So for a week from tomorrow, you will have to turn in written tests 4, 5, and 6. Section 2 projects, the translate English to Pig Latin, and the maintain student scores. And you will have to turn in 4-1, 4-2, 5-1, 5-2, 5-3, 6-1, and 6-2. Yes, I'm giving you a lot. We will slow it way down when we get to the second half of the book, starting in chapter 12. I guarantee you we will. All right. But until that point, I'd like us to get as far ahead as we possibly can. I would like to have at least a month left in the semester when we get down to this point right here. Because that'll give us time to work on a big project as a class. Plus, you are required to do your own project. If you say, what the heck is that? We'll talk about it later. All right. Okay. And if this is your first class, if you have never been in class before, if you have not been to Rankin before, I got an email this morning from my boss, Mr. G, Mr. Gudmested, terrific guy, terrific teacher, but he asks something about here. Says, good morning, Crystal. Were you aware that 3 students started in the AWD online program last week? All right, I don't know if that's his or mine. I don't know. And it says, how do you want to handle orientation? Well, you might be getting a thing that says, even though you're online, you might have to attend a 45-minute online Teams presentation, or either live or they'll tape it. I don't know. But in the past, that's what they've done. All right. Any questions on anything, please send me an email. All right, we've been going now for just about 4 hours, and that's with about 3 breaks. I think that those of you who need time to do the written tests for 1, 2, and 3, and that need to go in and do the extra exercises, 2-1 and 3-1. Remember, that's all due tomorrow by midnight. So start working on that, please, now. Any questions, as always, email me at jpscott@rankin.edu. All right. I'm going to be stepping away in just a couple minutes for about 10 minutes and just have my lunch. All right. And then I will be back online for the rest of the afternoon. All right. Those of you who were here today, thanks a lot for sticking around, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Have a good day.